Hello, I'm Psychology Professor Bruce Hinrichs. In this video, I'm going to talk about heredity and genetics, two amazing subjects, and I hope you enjoy it and learn a ton about these fascinating fields. Heredity refers to the passage of traits or characteristics from parent to offspring, and people for thousands of years have been interested in this concept, but it is only since the 19th century that it has been studied scientifically. Genetics is the modern scientific study of heredity, and this started really with Gregor Mendel, who in 1865 published his work on the inheritance of characteristics in plants. The story of heredity begins with the germination cells, often called germ cells. From the male, we have the sperm cell, and from the female, we have the egg, which is called an ovum. The plural of ovum is ova. When a sperm cell enters an ovum, this is called fertilization, what some people call conception. When the sperm cell fertilizes an egg, we get what is called a zygote. Zygote means a fertilized egg. You used to be a zygote, remember? It was dark. You were looking for a place to live. Now, to understand heredity, we have to understand chromosomes. Chromosomes are little wiggly chemicals, long thread-like strands of chemicals. A sperm cell of a normal human man has 23 of chromosomes. An ovum of a normal female has 23 chromosomes. These are selected through a process called meiosis from the person's 46 chromosomes. And so a zygote, a fertilized egg, remember, you used to be a zygote. The zygote gets 23 chromosomes from mom and 23 chromosomes from dad. Here's what chromosomes look like. They're very, very long strands wrapped around one another, these long threads of chemicals. A normal human being has 46 chromosomes, and if we took a picture of your chromosomes, by the way, they're found in the nucleus of a cell, this is called your karyotype. And here in this karyotype, I have made the largest chromosome the color blue. What scientists do is they take the two largest chromosomes, one from mom and one from dad, and call that pair number 1. And then the next largest are called pair number 2, and the next largest pair number 3, and so on. And so here we see the karyotype, the whole list of 46 chromosomes of a person, but the chromosomes have been arranged in pairs, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to 22, and then the 23rd pair, numbers 45 and 46 altogether, are called the sex chromosomes. Pairs 1 through 22 are called autosomes. So men and women have all the same autosomes, but the sex chromosomes are different. Typically, a man has a large X chromosome and a much smaller Y chromosome, whereas women typically have 2 large X chromosomes. Here you see the relative size of the X and Y chromosomes. The X chromosome much, much larger, has much more genetic material than the little tiny Y chromosome. So a sperm cell is going to be created with 23 chromosomes, selecting one number 1, one number 2, one number 3, one number 4, using the process of meiosis. And that means for the sex chromosome, a sperm cell might have an X chromosome or it might have a Y chromosome. An egg, an ovum, also goes through the process of meiosis to select out from the woman's 46 chromosomes to select 23, one number 1, one number 2, one number 3, and so on. And then for the sex chromosomes, a woman has an X and an X, so one of those will get into an egg. So every egg, every ovum will have an X chromosome if it's normal. So a normal zygote is going to have 44 autosomes and 2 sex chromosomes. One of those sex chromosomes will be an X from the mother. The other sex chromosome will either be an X or a Y from the father. Remember when you were a zygote, you were a fertilized egg? Well, the fertilized egg has a process called mitosis. In fact, all the cells in our body go through this process of sort of copying themselves. So one cell becomes two, two become four, four become eight, eight becomes 16, and so on. And after a while, you're a ball of cells called a blastocyst, which embeds itself into the uterine wall in the mommy's womb, and then it will grow into an embryo and later into a fetus and then be born and be a baby and then eventually be you. Sometimes multiple births happen. There are many different ways this can happen, and let's take the case of twins. There are two ways of making twins that are extremely common. 99.9% of twins are either MZ or DZ. MZ stands for monozygotic, means one zygote, one fertilized egg. Dizygotic means two fertilized eggs. So monozygotic, MZ twins, which the public calls identical, the way they are produced is that one sperm cell fertilizes one egg, and then during the process of mitosis, the fertilized egg splits apart and copies of the chromosomes in each. So they develop into birth and beyond with essentially 99.999% the same chromosomes. There are little variations that happen with various experiences. So chromosomes, genes can change, but MZ twins have pretty much 100% the same genes, chromosomes. Now, DZ twins, which are called fraternal, they're created when two different sperm cells, they could even come from two different men, fertilize two different eggs. And so they will have the same mother, maybe the same mother and father, but they're like siblings. They're only sharing some of their genes and their chromosomes. And then, of course, there's the case of conjoined twins. This is a special case of MZ. One sperm cell fertilizes one egg, and then mitosis starts to create copies of that one cell. But the zygote splits apart into two separate zygotes that are equal in chromosomes, identical. But then the glue that holds together these cells kind of joins back the two different zygotes partially. So they become partially joined, what we say conjoined twins. Conjoined twins can be joined at different parts of the body that are mirror images of each other. For example, the original conjoined twins, which were called Siamese twins, because they were from a country called Siam, which is now called Thailand, Chang and Eng, who today could very easily be separated, of course. And here we see illustrations of some other conjoined twins that cannot be separated very easily at all. And here are some more pictures of conjoined twins, including on the right a pair of very famous twins named Abby and Brittany Hensel from Minnesota, who even had a TV show on cable TV, and now are teachers. They both graduated from college and became elementary school teachers. Sometimes I ask people, are you a twin? Do you have a twin? And they say, no, I don't have a twin. And then I say, well, maybe you do and you don't know about it because there's a thing called vanishing twin syndrome. We discovered this with ultrasound. So you can do an ultrasound of a woman who's early in her pregnancy and you can see two embryos developing. But then some months later, the ultrasound shows that one of the embryos has vanished or shriveled up because did not get enough nutrients. And so this can be very upsetting to parents who think they're going to have twins and later discover that one of them has disappeared, has vanished. So the story of heredity is that we inherit chromosomes. from mommy and daddy, normally 23 from mom and 23 from dad, although sometimes people get a different number. Those are called chromosome abnormalities. You can watch one of my other videos about that. The chromosomes are long strands of twisty chemicals. And on the chromosome, we find what are called genes. A gene is a segment of a chromosome that carries a genetic recipe. Now, it's important to point out that we inherit this genetic recipe that's called the genotype, but that doesn't necessarily mean we will have the physical characteristics that are carried by those recipes, because lots of different things can interfere with that. And so we have what is called the phenotype, meaning our set of physical features. For example, me, I carry the gene for blue eyes, but because my father had blue eyes, so I got a gene for blue eyes, but I do not have blue eyes in my phenotype because I have other genes that dominate the gene for blue eyes. A gene then is a segment of a chromosome that carries a specific recipe, and the recipe is made up of chemicals. And genes are found in certain places. They have what is called an address. Yeah, that's the scientific term for the place we find a gene on a chromosome is called its address. And scientists have discovered the human genome now, and we know where these addresses are. The address of a gene is indicated first by a number, which indicates the chromosome that it's on. So here in this illustration is chromosome number 2. And then comes a letter P or Q, depending if it's on the short arm or the long arm of the chromosome. And then there are some other numbers that indicate the address of the gene. So each gene has its own address. If we look up close at a gene or a chromosome, we find that it is made of a chemical called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And the DNA is made up of 4 different chemicals that are known by their initials, their first letter. And in fact, they're just called letters. Even in science, we call them a letter. So there's the chemical letter A that always matches up with the letter T. And then there's this C that always matches up with G. I always tell people the way to remember this. A goes with T, just remember always together. And C goes with G, just remember closely glued. And that's the formula for DNA. And now some cartoons about DNA. On the left, we have DNA testing. Yeah, a bunch of DNA molecules are in the classroom taking a test. And on the right, DNA analysis. Yeah, there's the DNA molecule on Freud's couch or some psychiatrist's couch. Ha ha ha. So you are getting chromosomes and genes from both parents. So you might get the same exact gene from mom and dad, which is fine, then your body would follow that recipe. But sometimes we get a different gene from mom and dad, and then there's a problem. So what is your body going to do? Is it going to follow the gene from mom? Is it going to follow the gene from dad? Is it going to combine them? Sometimes your body combines them like blood type, but usually your body chooses one gene and ignores the other one. The gene that gets chosen is called dominant, and the gene that is ignored is called recessive because it recedes into the background. So genes are tagged in a biological way. Some genes are dominant, that is, those genes are tagged that say, follow me, do what I say. And so if you have 2 different genes, usually your body will follow one of them. We call that the dominant gene. An example of a recessive gene is the gene for a disorder called cystic fibrosis that causes serious lung problems, and people can even die from this disorder. And this is autosomal recessive. Autosomal means it is not a gene on the sex chromosomes, so that means it occurs equally in men and women. And it is recessive, meaning you have to inherit this gene from both parents in order to have cystic fibrosis. Because if you have a dominant gene from either parent, then your body will ignore this gene. So here is a little diagram that shows how you calculate the probability that a child will inherit cystic fibrosis. So notice that we use a capital N meaning a normal gene and a lowercase CF means recessive. So capital letter means dominant gene and a lowercase means recessive gene. So let's say dad is a carrier of cystic fibrosis and mom is a carrier. So we just calculate the 4 different possibilities. Child 1 might get both normal genes. Child 2 gets a normal gene and a CF gene. Child 3 gets a CF gene and a normal gene, but child 4 has both the CF gene. So child 4 would have cystic fibrosis. That means 1 out of 4 chance that the child will have cystic fibrosis, 2 out of 4 or 1/2 chance of being a carrier, and 1 out of 4 chance of not being a carrier at all. I used cystic fibrosis as an example of autosomal recessive. Here's a more general chart that shows essentially the same thing that I just showed you, of how we calculate the odds of inheritance of a trait that is autosomal recessive. Remember, autosomal means it's not on the sex chromosomes, therefore seen equally in males and females. Recessive means you have to inherit it from both parents in order to have it, because if you get the dominant gene, you will not have the other one. Now, what happens if a recessive gene is carried on a sex chromosome, let's say the X chromosome? Now that's different. These are called sex-linked traits. They're different because mommy has 2 X chromosomes and daddy only has 1. So this means that recessive traits on the X chromosome would be inherited from the mother, except in girls who might inherit it from the father, but it would, if it's recessive, they would not have that in their phenotype because they would have to get it from the mother also. Sometimes a chromosome or a gene is mutated. A mutation means that there's a mistake, an error in the chemical recipe. And this can result in various kinds of problems. For example, finger development that we see in humans and in mice and in cats. That's a mutation. Here we see some examples of the phenotype, the physical features that result from mutations in various genes that affect finger and toe development in humans. Sometimes a mutation is autosomal dominant, comes from a dominant gene. That means you only have to inherit it from one of your parents, not from both. Most common of these is Apert syndrome, which is a C to G mutation on chromosome 10. There are many different types of mutations. These are biological mistakes that happen in the DNA. One of them is called a deletion. It means a piece of a chromosome is missing. The most common deletion is DiGeorge syndrome. And then another interesting one is Williams syndrome, which these characteristics are studied by psychologists to see how genetics links to psychological features. Perhaps you've heard of gene editing. Yes, researchers have many techniques for editing, for changing the DNA sequence of a gene. The most common of these tools is called CRISPR. So CRISPR is a technique for changing the DNA sequence. It's done by making a break, inserting a break, a cut in the DNA, and then inserting a mechanism for making the change that you want. So you'll hear about CRISPR in the news a lot. Okay, time for a cartoon break. On the left, apparently the scientists have a nightclub, but you can't get in if you're wearing jeans. Ha 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 ha. And on the right, at the Genetic Research Institute, the professor says, "Darling, we were made for each other." You're right. Okay, we can go on. One of the most interesting areas of genetics today is called epigenetics or epigenetics. And this is a study of how genes are turned on or off. And it turns out there are biological processes that can turn on or off a gene by other genes or by hormones or by experiences that you have. So this is fascinating that a person's genes can be turned on by having a traumatic experience, for example, or by poverty, or by some other experience that affects your body in such a way, produces hormones and other effects that turn on or off certain genes that lead to certain phenotypical results. And what's interesting about this is that those genes that are turned on or off can then be passed on to your offspring and maybe from them to their offspring. So even your grandchildren can be influenced by some experience that you've had. This is called epigenetics, very fascinating field of study today. One of the most common questions that people ask today about inheritance, about psychological factors as well as physical factors, but mostly psychological factors like intelligence. Does that come from nature or from nurture? This is famous nature-nurture question or nature-nurture issue. And by nature, people mean sort of the inherited stuff, the genetic stuff. And by nurture, they mean your environment, your experience, the way you're raised, the way you're nurtured, the way you're brought up. And the answer, you're not going to like it, is that you cannot separate these two. Nature and nurture are intertwined together. That epigenetics is a really good example of it, that your genes are influenced by your experiences. And of course, the genes that we have, that we inherited, were influenced by the experiences of our predecessors long, long ago. So nature and nurture are intertwined together in such a fashion that you can't really separate them. What psychologists like to say when someone asks, is such and such a disease or a condition inherited? Is alcoholism inherited? Is dyslexia inherited? We like to say it's always an interaction. There's always genetic factors that are involved, but there's always other factors that are involved. And this is like 99.9% of the time true, that there's an interacting effect of genes and environment. It isn't just adding them together, they interact together. All right, that'll bring us to the end of this video on heredity and genetics. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you had some fun along the way. Watch some more of my videos. My channel's Brucey. Bye-bye.